Welcome back to the Newsmaker Live. DBS and Newsmaker Live. I'm Clinton Reynolds. I'm joined by Ayodele, Hippolyte, and Maria Fontenelle. Yeah, we were just chatting about the DBS News World, so that is why I almost said welcome to the DBS News World.
You got transported.
Yes. I was in the DBS News World. Yes, we're talking about freedom of information, and this is a sticking point for me. You know, information is not readily available, especially from public sources. The government holds information back from the public, from the media, and it's like pulling teeth to get information which should be in the public's domain.
So what's them pulling teeth?
Isn't that the worst form of censorship that you can find? Because if you're a media organization and producing news in particular, or even the current affairs, if you don't have the information, how can you produce something that is reflective of what is going on in the society?
Which is why it goes back to the communication policy that the government needs to have. Because if you have a policy that says that there's a right to information, whether you are a member of the public or the media or fraternity, whomever you are as a citizen, you have a right to the information that's in the public domain, the public realm, that is government, then they will have no right to withhold the information or to, be difficult, because then it's policy, and policy implies legal regulation and so on. So that's why I'm saying to the Media Association that if you want to make your life a bit easier, you need to press the government to get a communication policy, because without policy you can't really compel anyone, any government agent or agency or body to give you the information. Based on what? Unless you're going to invoke, I know the UN has this right to information, right? Yeah. The act and so on. You can invoke that, but please, at a local level, that doesn't really have any teeth.
Yeah, it's difficult to because to get this, we hear about the big news organizations in the US, for example, to get information from the Department of Defense, then they would sue.
That's right.
And then a court would force the government to
provide a legal framework
exactly
in place. Yeah.
It goes even further beyond that, because there are simple pieces of information that should be available to the public at large, and the media has difficulty obtaining because the government workers themselves are unaware of their responsibility to the public. They treat the information like it is their personal piggy bank that they will not open for anybody. And then you have to keep going up the ladder to get even the slightest a little piece of information. That's one problem. But again, the problem goes back to what the Media Association needs to focus on, and we have decided as a group to focus on, which is education and empowerment of our members, because then we also need to know, what do we have a right to? Where can we access information? How do we get information when people are acting as if the information is theirs to keep? How do we get through to that? Do we use sources, or do we use the big stick and threaten them? Do we go to their superiors? What are our rights within any particular situation? When do we have a right to shoot? When do we have a right to ask questions? What do we do if we speak into a minister who has used public funds for certain purposes that the public should know of, but then acts as if that is none of the public sort of media's business? Right. So the media personnel themselves need to know what their rights are, where they have access to information, and even in cases where the public should have information but then it's not their right, the media can't access it, to find ways like looking for sources, developing connections and networks. Simple things like that. They need to know how to do that, which sometimes they don't because they have not been trained or they have not been exposed. And that is where we need to look at education and share a simple thing like socializing.
Yes.
We socialize, we meet, we speak, and you share your stories with me, especially as somebody who's more experienced in the media. You share stories with me, or somebody who has some more education, who may have more knowledge of the law. You give me a little spark and I go research it, I go follow up on it, and that in itself can inspire me to continue what I'm doing, can actually encourage me to go research, and could give me a little leeway into something that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, actually, Maria, you raise a good point about education of the media practitioners, because I think a lot of people in media don't understand their own rights in terms of what they can have access to, and media and the law.
Yes.
Very important. I know that there have been cases where some media houses have actually, been sued and successfully, and have had to pay out money because of an ignorance of the law and not understanding the critical nature of how you report and what you report. So I agree that the association should continue to educate its members about its rights to information, but the people in the public service too. Sometimes it's not understanding that this is a right. Yes. That people have a right to information, because of course there are repercussions. People might get into trouble, things happen, so one has to look at it from the other side too. I mean, I was a public servant, right? Yes. And yes, so you have to
from both sides
coming from both sides. And I can tell you it can be an atmosphere where you don't want to be the one that let things out, or you don't want to be the one that is blamed for something. So it's a matter of education on both sides, which is why communication policy is key.
Necessary.
Right. And I just want to make reference to the Whistleblower Act, Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989 in the U.S., which protects people, who see misconduct in government, who decide, okay, you know what, this is going on, it is wrong, and notwithstanding, in our local context, we have the staff orders, which prohibits you from speaking, about issues happening in government or matters arising out of government. This something similar to this will protect you. Because at the end of the day, public servants are there to protect the interests of the public.
Yes, that's
right. They are not there at the whim of a politician.
Really?
Politicians come and they go. Yes. Should not be. Politicians,
public service.
They're there in the interest of the public. The politicians should be as well. However, we see I'm moving away from that, I mean, politicians...
I think you should stop the politician bashing. Let's keep it to the public.
I love politicians.
But you see right there, he has demonstrated another aspect of it. He loves politicians, really. I mean, we have this network, this old boy network,
really, Maria,
really and truly, that we all have to be aware of. You may talk about a whistleblower being protected, even in the US, where the law has been enacted. We know that, okay, I may be protected. Under the law, I may get a certain settlement. I may not lose my job directly as a result of some information that I've let out. However, there are so many ways to stifle and punish somebody for doing something, and we have to be cognizant of that. Which is why even one of the journalistic tools that we need to use is to be able to have sources that are anonymous, sources that we know will give us good information that of course they could back up, and keep that person, protect that person, because you need, the public needs to know, but the person themselves, as you said, you work in the public service, you're at the whim of politicians, even in the private sector. Sometimes there are things going on that the public needs to know, and if somebody exposes it, they lose out, they could be victimized. So you need to have, as one of your tools, being able to build a network of people that could give information without you putting those people at risk. So the public is informed, they're able to take action based on the information without necessarily endangering somebody. Again, another tool that media people need to learn to use.
Which may be a little bit more difficult in a small island.
It's very difficult.
Yes.
Because everybody knows everybody, as they
and
say.
The proximity, yes. Yeah. So that may be a problem. Not that you mustn't try, but it's a risk. Yes.
And I got so many phone calls as a reporter. It's like, okay, you need to follow up on this, but just don't say I said.
Yes.
I'm not the one who
has to be careful.
Now, talking about sources, I want to go back to your thesis, Ayodele, and your research. What did you focus on?
Okay.
Specifically, and also what did you
the
uncover?
Findings, right? Okay. So as I said, the focus was on the current affairs documentary as produced in St. Lucia by St. Lucians. I looked at the history of the genre. So specifically, I looked at Kutumba, this documentary produced by Folk Research Center back in 1999, because I wanted to do a spectrum and see how the format had evolved. And then I moved to the Government Information Service that did they did it in Bhutan, that's around the same time, and then 2005 they had a series called Hidden Treasures. The point I was making though was that the current affairs documentary in St. Lucia, unlike the form in more developed countries, tended to focus on the rural. The documentary form, the current affairs documentary form in more advanced countries tended to focus on the urban, because that's where a lot of the social issues are, a lot of the gritty edgy issues of, you know, crime and so on. That's what the current affairs documentary is traditionally associated with in the more advanced countries, the countries that are ahead of us in terms of the form. In St. Lucia, the current affairs documentary, by stark contrast, focused on the rural, what is, you know, the bucolic, the countryside of life, which is unusual, because what was uncovered in my study is that in the rural there are social problems that one could not necessarily associate with a sort of more pastoral, sort of more laid-back kind of life, but beneath that surface are serious social, demographic issues of, you know, of course, poverty and lack of access. But how I argued was that from the folk research documentation Kutumba, which I'm not sure if it was 1999, I think it was maybe a little bit earlier, that they were looking at the folk in terms of, because folk research center, but what the folk meant, like folk dances, what it meant in terms of St. Lucian identity and culture and heritage. But by the time you move away from the 90s, moving into the 2000s and so on, that focus had shifted more to the harsher side of life in the rural context. So what I was trying to argue is that in terms of the St. Lucian context, the current affairs documentary had moved away not just from the cultural and more towards the social. While in bigger countries, they don't really look at the social, we look at the cultural, we look at the current affairs form, look at hard things, gritty things. So that's how St. Lucia is different in how it adapted the form. But within that context, Clinton, what I found was that the news environment or the media production environment in St. Lucia had some unique challenges. We talked about them, the lack of training and so on, but that we had a unique eye, and that the way we presented our document, our filmic style was very much about the environment, always showing the lush and the sort of pastoral side of St. Lucia, trying to locate the presenter within context rather than have what you call the voice of God, which is you're just hearing the voice over the images. You actually had the presenter inserted within, because of course, you know, St. Lucia, we're a small society, we know everybody, we have that sort of more informal and intimate feel. So our documentary making does that. I must say, I mean, I would love it if we could do some more studies of what has happened since. I need to note Untold Stories, that's done by Calabash TV, has taken the form to a different level, where you don't even have a narrator or presenter anymore. What you have people presenting the stories themselves, telling the story, the characters in the documentary. Yeah. So that's moving that way. And the issues that are tackled are far more, should I say, risque or controversial. So the form has moved.
I always prefer, you know, that form, you know, the documentaries that I've done, you know, have the characters narrating the story instead of having this person trying to create the context, you know, have them put everything in context and let them tell.
Although some commentaries sometimes help.
I do find that the commentary, sometimes the commentary is a bit too helpful in some of the newer documentaries. I've noticed there's a bit of editorializing. That's not necessary. But how much impact do you from your research, how much impact does the fact that it's a small country and some of the grittier stuff also impacts on your life? It would be nice for me to tell my story. What we've seen with Untold Stories as well is it would be great to tell my story. But then there's always that backlash. I have to live in the community, you know, that I have exposed. And we've seen with The Voice, for example, there's a very brave young lady who's come out and she's doing, she's admitted she's been a victim of sexual abuse and rape. And she's doing a series of articles where she speaks about people, speaks to people who have been abused and speaks to the community and encourages them to come out and, you know, always also encourages them to seek help, etc. But that is something that you would not really see because St. Lucia being so small, anything that you put out there, it's nice to focus on, oh, we have our little folk traditions, that's fine. But focus on the grittier aspects. Okay, you go down to this ghetto area and look at the fact of the life of how these people live. Why do they live the way they do? What has contributed to their life? And let them speak about it. I mean, that they themselves may be scared to be upfront. I mean, you have encountered that in your work when people speak for themselves, how it's taken, could be taken completely out of context, and could also be a backlash for them. How much do you think that has impacted the smaller society?
Yes, and we touched on it earlier in terms of the proximity of how, you know, small societies can impact how much people can say and do. However, I must say that I think that St. Lucia, at least, I mean, I lived there for the last 20 years, we seem to have gotten braver. We seem to have